At least 20 Trump supporters now have a mysterious illness after attending a rally in Tucson, Arizona. 14 Republicans vote against a GOP proposed continuing resolution, bringing Speaker Johnson's control over his own party into question. And we'll have the latest on the exploding pagers that wounded thousands of Hezbollah operatives. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Thursday, September 19th. Last week, Donald Trump had a rally in Tucson, Arizona that stirred up some local controversy in a largely left-wing city. But before the event, a Pima County supervisor posted a sign in Spanish on social media that read, "F you, MAGA, no more orange." But the real shock came after the rally when 20 attendees reported mysterious symptoms like blurry vision and facial swelling. With no clear cause, this strange illness has left many wondering what really happened. So I'm joined by Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief for Blaze News, Steve Baker, investigative journalist for Blaze Media, and Christy Kelly, a political journalist who recently wrote about this for Arizona Globe. So Christy, let's start with you. Can you walk us through what happened at this Tucson rally?
Yes. So as you explained, it wasn't not an ordinary rally. I mean, there was a lot of consternation going into the rally. The namesake of the venue, Linda Ronstadt, published to social media a lengthy post stating her displeasure with Trump even being there. And then, of course, the board of supervisor. So like every rally, Trump had supporters behind him. Some Latinos for Trump were seated to his right. So if you're looking at the stage, they were actually going to be to his left if you're in the audience facing. So about, I would say, let's say 20 to 25 people were seated behind Trump. Of those that were seated behind him, I've spoken to 10 who have come down with some sort of mystery illness.
So what have these people told you?
Yes. So they said, immediately, of course, they're on the stage for anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. They're seated there on the stage, waiting for Trump to get there, the other dignitaries to speak. They didn't think anything of it. Everything in the rally went fine. Every single person that I spoke to said 20 to 30 minutes after they left the rally, they began to get blurry eyes, blurry vision. Some said their nose started stinging. They started experiencing redness that progressively got worse. I spoke to one lady. She said she even doused her eyes with milk because they were hurting so bad until she finally had to go to the ER. Of about 6 or 7 that I spoke to, they did end up in the ER and they end up being referred to their ophthalmologist. So it got to the point, Tucson is a fairly small city. So later in the night, the doctor, when the people came, the doctor was like, "Oh, you must have been at the Trump rally. We've had others come in." So of the 2 that I spoke to that were referred to their ophthalmologist that actually gave me the paperwork, they all indicated bilateral ocular chemical burn and that they were diffusing the eyes with eye drops to treat a chemical abrasion. So the emergency room physicians were less definitive. They were like, it could have been the exposure to the lighting. It could have been extreme exposure to lighting, or it could have been something, an irritant in the air. But I do have these 2 medical reports in front of me that do indicate that the ophthalmologist said it was some sort of chemical burn.
Now, is there any ongoing investigation for a potential source of where some of this could have come from, what this could have caused? Because now you're saying the doctors, they were aware of this as the people were even coming in.
Yes. So this is definitely where it gets a little tricky because the rally was on Thursday. Friday morning, some of these participants, they're all in this prayer group together. So this is how I even heard about it, because one of the people that was on the prayer call put it on social media, was like, hey, pray for, these people. They've been injured after attending the Trump rally. And so it was not their immediate concern to, alert the media or even to really tell anybody per se. They did call the people who placed them on the stage. So they were invited on the stage by local organizers. They called them. They've called the facility. I've called the facility. I have not heard a statement from either the facility or the Tucson police, who I know have also been alerted.
I want to go to Steve Baker because, I mean, I don't want to, speculate, but I do want to speculate. I mean, one thing that we should say, people out there are saying, and the reason in part this is drawing attention and is concerning is because there have been people talking about Havana syndrome and directed energy weapons out there, not just on an Alex Jones type show, but in the government itself. There's been congressional hearings. Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe speculate a little bit on what people are saying out there?
Yeah, but before I do any speculation at all, I would like to ask Christy, first of all, is in these medical reports from the doctors, whether they were the ER doctors or physicians who have examined these patients afterwards, have they actually identified any chemical property whatsoever, either in their eyes, on their skin? So is there an actual identifiable irritant?
I don't believe so. There was just a summary that they were treating it for a chemical abrasion. And then there was also that it was an ocular chemical burn. But I am not a doctor. So it was a lot of medical jargon that is probably above my pay grade that was on the medical reports. So someone like yourself could probably look at it with a set of fresh eyes and maybe see something that I was not able to determine.
Would you say that it was a chemical-like burn, or were they emphatic that it was, in fact, a chemical source to this problem?
The exact wording, and I do have a JD, so I am very precise in the language, says they were diffusing the eyes for chemical abrasion and that they spotted the bilateral ocular chemical burn.
Well, see,
they did not use the term like a burn.
Yeah, and so with that information there, that would take me away from the speculation of any type of directed energy weapon. And these things are in the news. The CIA continues to deny their very existence, but there's actually been congressional hearings. In fact, there was a congressional hearings just this year on May 8th. 2024, in which experts, military experts, legal experts were bringing the issue of Havana syndrome before Congress because we have hundreds of citizens, not just our diplomatic corps, not just our special forces, not just our intelligence services around the world who are being affected by this mysterious illness, but also this is now cropping up and being used domestically. But that doesn't sound like what we're talking about in Tucson.
Yeah, and we should say, I mean, this is as a friend said today, isn't Havana syndrome just long COVID for people in the State Department who don't want to work, which is a terrible thing to say. But I get it. That's what I first thought too. But there's something very serious going on there. So I think that is one of the things that drew people's attention to this. I guess to rule that out, you would have to say you'd have to know that these were not just chemical-like effects, but that there was actually you have to get to the cause of what the chemical was. Yeah, is it true that Havana syndrome is like in these cases they would have chemical-like effects? They
would absolutely have exactly very similar effects to what Christy is describing right here. But it also includes confusion, severe headaches, things of that nature that you can get from chemical properties exposure, but without the chemical element involved, because we're talking about microwave energy weapons, and we're talking about what they refer to as ultrasound weapons.
But it would involve a burn.
The microwave is in fact a burn. That's
what's interesting, Christy. Is it's curious. I mean, I assume that we'll know. I mean, they really need to get to the bottom of this, of what exactly this is. And I'm curious if you know. Who, if anyone, is actually trying to investigate this. I guess it sounds like it's not clear at all. But I would imagine that maybe more people were affected. I think a lot of people, when they hear this, would say, "Well, why did Trump? Was he affected, or was anyone else around just this particular group affected? Do we know?"
It appears that Trump was not affected. It also appears that there were several people that had contacts or glasses, and they were not affected. There were also people that were only on the stage for a partial amount of time, like say an hour or 20 minutes. They also were not affected. So it was only the people that were there for the entire duration, which was the 3.5 to the 4 hours, and that were not wearing contacts or glasses. Now, the participants were told that it was because of the lighting, that could have been the long exposure to the lighting. That could have been part of the reason. As far as the investigation, I do know that the Trump campaign here locally has been on top of it. They've been fielding all of the complaints, and I assume they are spearheading an investigation as to what is going on.
Well, Christy, please keep us updated if you hear anything else. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. I did also want to say that these are all fierce patriots that love Trump, and they are not dissuaded from their love of him, their support, and attending future rallies. They are not afraid.
You'll love to hear it. Thanks so much, Christy.
Thank you.
Chris Bedford will break down the latest setback for the federal voter ID law up next. We know Americans are hurting financially, and if you listen to that story, you know that you need some coverage. But if you don't want to go through the traditional healthcare route, you know that government isn't the answer, then where can you turn? Well, take a look at Lassie Health, Laasy, easy for me to say. Lassie Health isn't health insurance, but it is the access to the healthcare that you want without all the red tape, restrictions, and the inflated costs. And the best news is the coverage starts at just $30 a month. And so you can get some transparent pricing for once. You'll know that the coverage is going to tailor the needs that you have, and you'll get the access to the healthcare that you want without breaking the bank. And there's no annual or lifetime cap on the services, and you can start the plan at any time. And the best part about it is you're going to get up to 60% off lab tests, up to 75% off the image testings, and procedures and surgeries are 50% off. Lassie Health is a game changer, so be sure to check out their affordable plans that put you in control of your healthcare at healthylink.com/blaze. For a limited time, get your first month free, up to $100 off eligible plans. So get healthy, be healthy, and stay healthy without breaking the bank at healthylink.com/blaze. Yesterday, Speaker Mike Johnson took a hit when 14 Republicans voted against a funding bill intended to avoid a government shutdown. Now, Johnson had tied the SAVE Act to the election integrity bill, and they wanted to tie it to the spending legislation, but that measure failed 220 to 202. So here to break it down for us, of course, is Chris Bedford, senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent for Blaze Media. So, Chris, let's be real. How bad of a hit is this for Speaker Johnson?
It's disastrous on all of his sides, every one of his flanks. I've spoken to people in the last 24 hours who are on the conservative side, who are on the angry, no vote conservative side, who are on more of the leadership side, and no one's happy. The end result here is that Donald Trump was unable to convince some of the more conservative hardliners to come around on this bill. There's a number of those people who I don't actually think are being particularly productive here. And then there's Johnson was unable to whip the defense hawks and the people who typically would be within his column. He lost a number of those. The end result is the Speaker brought a bill to the floor that he didn't really push nearly as hard as you would think this sort of legislation would need to be pushed, without any sort of real threats or backing, saying, for example, listen, Senate, there's going to be no omnibus. Either you pass this legislation and you do it now, or we start negotiations here, or the House of Representatives leaves town and the government ends up shutting down. None of that was actually backed up. The campaign that you would normally expect didn't happen. Members of his own leadership team have said that they were left in the dark. Rumors around Capitol Hill are that there was essentially no whipping of the bill. Conservative hardliners didn't feel like they had any actual call to come over and take this vote. And the Speaker ended up bringing something to the floor that, by all means, it looked like he knew would fail, which is inexplicably amateurish.
Chris, this is everything that voters hate about Washington, D.C. and the Republican establishment and Republicans generally. It's all sort of here in this story. I mean, we're in the middle of a historic election year. We have people like Elon Musk rallying to the team, yelling about what needs to happen. And yet we still have what seems to be a utter, complete, and colossal failure. And if that's accurate, what happens to Johnson? How in the hell is he going to stay in this position? Are enough people at least angry there to make it hard for him to continue?
Yes. I mean, it was already difficult for Johnson to stay in this position. He had already lost the support of even the people who typically align with leadership against conservatives. The consistent thing I hear from insiders and former insiders who now watch from the private sector is that his team is in over their head, that he's in over his head, that he hasn't done the alliance building that's necessary in a speakership, that he's made promises to a lot of different people and none of which he's been able to keep. So you're going to get the election in November. Now, if Republicans lose the House of Representatives, he is 100% out. If they win, he may be able to pull together some kind of coalition to limp over into January. But then the new Congress is going to get here. They're going to get together and they're going to set the rules for the next Republican conference, the next caucus. That's where we saw the massive fight that ended up with McCarthy kicked out of the speakership. And there's basically no shot, I would say, that Johnson survives as speaker into late January at this point.
Well, we have seen some shakeup at the top. The House Freedom Caucus has a new chair. Maryland Representative Andy Harris is that guy. So, Chris, what can you tell us about him?
Well, he's an interesting pick. The Freedom Caucus had a couple of different options here. Former Chairman Scott Perry, for example, was running. Now, he's someone who is an outspoken Freedom Caucus member, outspoken conservative, but he's also in a district that's something like R+3. It's not completely safe by Freedom Caucus standards by any means. So he's always facing tough re-election fights. And I think the Freedom Caucus members looked at that and said, hey, Scott, we love you, but we already lost a chairman to a runoff campaign, and it caused enough trouble for the Freedom Caucus. We're going to go with someone who's a little more safe. This also marks a change in tactics, potentially, for the Freedom Caucus. Now, we're scheduled to have an interview, which I'll bring to you on Blaze News tonight next week with the new chairman of the Freedom Caucus. But in the meantime, he's actually someone who's skilled in the art of appropriations. Something that conservatives love to rail about, but as one longtime, more moderate Republican appropriation staffer told me, a lot of complaining from a lot of people who don't actually know how this process works. Appropriations is difficult. It's the hard work of actually governing. So now the chairman's someone who understands that. It sets the Freedom Caucus for a potentially more insidery, potentially more productive role in the next coming months, which, you know, the government runs out of money at the end of September. I'm doubtful that's going to come down to the actual deadline. They're probably going to pass a clean 3-month continuing resolution. And the fight begins in December when everyone just wants to go to town for Christmas. That's how you end up with a disgusting omnibus bill that ties the hands of the next administration for the first 10 months or whatever. There really aren't many good options left on the table here. But having someone who knows appropriations, wielding this caucus in such a thin majority, if the caucus can actually stay in line and not just go running off cliffs in different directions, could be really effective.
Bedford, I love that you're throwing your own teases in there. The blaze.com/Bedford is where you can go to get the Beltway brief. Let's just go ahead and throw it all out there. Chris, thanks so much.
Great to be here.
Although the House Freedom Caucus is finding its footing, state freedom caucuses are starting to pick up steam. Daniel Horowitz will give us the latest next. After more than 235 years, the radical left is now saying that we need saving from the Constitution. And they're starting by working to the end of the independence of the Supreme Court. And they want to create their own supermajority by packing the court with enough handpicked justices to get the outcomes that they want. Even President Biden has gotten into the act by making reforming the court one of his final priorities before he leaves office, or whoever is currently in charge. But don't be fooled, because their endgame is really court packing. And at First Liberty, we call this an assault on what it really is. It's a Supreme Court coup. Now, these extremists want to eliminate the court's conservative majority by packing the Supreme Court with their own handpicked justices, and they're fighting the thing that, in January could be the nation's reality. So the simple majority votes in the House and Senate combined with the president's signature could put their plan to pack the court into law. But right now, if we unite our voices, if we take action together, we can put a stop to the radical left's plan to take control of the Supreme Court. The future of the court, of preserving an independent judiciary, is in our hands. And that's why we're taking action. And we need you to join us. With 1 million patriots like you standing for the Supreme Court, we can safeguard the independence of the judiciary, just as the founding fathers intended. And by saying no to the left Supreme Court coup, we can secure the blessings of liberty and protect the future of our constitutional rights for our children and grandchildren. So go to supremecoup.com/Jill. That's supremecoup.com/Jill to learn how you can help stop the radical left's takeover of the Supreme Court. There's a growing political movement that's shaking up the GOP establishment. State Freedom Caucuses are challenging the traditional Republican powers, and they're winning. These conservative lawmakers are fighting for limited government, fiscal responsibility, and individual freedoms. What a concept, you guys. And their victories are sending shockwaves throughout state houses nationwide. So to tell us more, Daniel Horowitz, Blaze host of Conservative Review, joins us now. So Daniel, what have the victories been from the Freedom Caucuses lately?
Sure. So first, obviously, the legislative victories. What they have done is, if you've noticed, you hear a lot of news about red states banning castration of minors, red states finally trying to clamp down on illegal immigration, all these things that we never heard about for years. You had these stealthily, very carefully crafted legislative sessions in red states that would evince a conservative image, but would do absolutely nothing and continue to grow government and serve as a conduit for the left into those states. And suddenly now there is success. Well, it didn't come out of nowhere. And there was an organized opposition through the State Freedom Caucus Network. They now have it in 12 states. And, what they would do is they would force amendment votes, floor votes, hold up or filibuster bad bills. They literally treated the GOP establishment as if it was the Democrats, because they kind of are the Democrats. And they basically turned it into a fight of the uniparty versus the Freedom Caucus. Now, when you do that and you kick them in the nuts, well, they're not going to stand back and take it. We have just gone through, ending in September, the first primary season after these Freedom Caucuses have been, fully up and running and totally exposing the GOP in these states as nothing but, forward advancing guards for the Democrats. The GOP establishment has spent in some states several $1 million against Freedom Caucus members. And you have to understand, most of these states are smaller rural markets, and that's a tremendous amount of money. Typically, these races cost between $30,000 and $50,000. And yet 101 out of 106 Freedom Caucus members who are at least publicly known that have stood for re-election have won their seats. And then on offense, they've picked up 50 more members and defeated 29 incumbents, including a number of committee chairs, floor leaders, and people with cumulatively with hundreds of years of incumbency behind them.
Daniel, I think that for many in our audience, this is the real Republican Party, essentially. And the numbers, anyone listening, we all should be happy to hear this. What did you say? 101 out of 106 races won, and then they've added 50 new people in. And you're talking about some of the reddest states in America where Republicans have become, the Republicans in charge have become complacent and are the worst, often as bad as Democrats. Okay, so you've just described a war within the party within a party, and here being victorious against the so-called uniparty. What are the central lessons that we can learn from this? I mean, how have they been able to defy the GOP establishment and just achieve such radical success?
Sure. So number one, obviously, this stands in stark contrast to the congressional primaries, where not a single incumbent, a rhino, has gone down in the primary. In fact, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus was defeated. I mean, there's a very big difference there. Some of that is because legislative districts are much smaller. The bar to entry is much lower. It takes less money. Fundamentally, we have a money problem. All the money is with the bad guys. But also, they have a unified strategy. They pray together. They strategize together. They're not just a bunch of individual conservatives. They decided that they're going to take a blood oath together, run a slate of candidates. And then also part of the problem, the other lesson we've learned is that for years, we haven't created an environment for primaries. So a lot of conservatives felt, well, we don't have the votes to push for state-based immigration enforcement. We don't have the votes to push for, property tax relief in a state where, housing is just skyrocketing. So we're not going to do it. We're not going to force it. Instead, they violated unofficial protocols where, you don't upset the party's business, and they were willing to be thrown out of the caucus, thrown off committees, but they forced votes and tagged all of these members with bad votes. And another related point is they fight off season 2. So even though a lot of legislatures are only in session for 3 or 4 months or sometimes even shorter, but all 12 months of the year, they pull together their resources of policy, communications, and they go around the state campaigning. And, for example, in South Carolina recently, they discovered that the school board is not following the new law on getting rid of some of the porn in the school books, and they put them on notice. They expose that. They expose the governors for not enforcing this stuff. And the voters now understand that there is a brand. It's not just a random set of candidates that the rhinos could confuse voters and run as the conservatives and paint our guys as the liberals. Now they understand you're either uniparty or you're Freedom Caucus.
Earlier on the show, we were talking with Chris Bedford about the new House Freedom Caucus chair and Andy Harris out of Maryland. What do you know about him? And is this somebody that should be taking over this position?
Well, look, I'm a native Marylander, so certainly there's pride there. He was really a rock star in the legislature, which is a thankless job in the state like Maryland, where Republicans are the minority. I think he is a very sincere person. He's a good person. What the problem they have is I don't think it's the chairman that matters. And I know this is a bit controversial, but the reality is it's pretty stark in front of our eyes. The National Freedom Caucus is irrevocably divided. I cannot overstate the importance of unity. Yes, conservatives, you put them in a room, you get 5 members, you get 10 ideas, because we're free thinkers, we don't goose step. But ultimately, you do have to unify behind a long-term vision. I attended the first annual summit of the State Freedom Caucuses, and they gave the South Carolina Freedom Caucus the award of the best caucus of the year. And a lot of that, I think, was because these guys were so unified when they were kicked out of the conference. They prayed together. They strategized together. Here and there, you might have, in the minutia, you'll take a little, different votes here and there. But you don't have this backstabbing. And there's just way too much of that going on at the national level.
30 seconds we have left. Can you give us any indication of where people can go to kind of check out and learn more about the Freedom Caucus? I assume they have a website. Are there certain figures that they should follow? What should we do?
StateFreedomCaucus.org. And again, I don't work for them. I just see it as the only group that's actually putting points on the board. You could see if you're in one of the 12 states, hopefully Texas, our flagship there, you'll be the 13th state, I hope, by January. But if you do find one of those states there, make sure you get in contact with the roster of members, and they will work with you on your ideas to get them introduced.
Daniel, if they're not the 13th state, we're going to need you to make another trip back here and get them into gear. Thanks so much for your time.
Had a lot of fun. Take care.
We'll have an update on the exploding pager story straight out of a James Bond movie coming up. The second presidential debate exposed the blatant truth that the media is no longer just biased, but they're also controlling the narrative. And Kamala was given free rein to lie without a single fact check. And we all know that Donald Trump was bombarded with the constant interruptions and the phony corrections. So we've long suspected that we've had state-controlled media, but now it's glaringly obvious. And we're living in media-controlled state now. From President Biden's quiet exit to the political scene, and Kamala Harris now, she's that carefully orchestrated rise they've all tried to put out there for her. Well, it's the persistent effort to undermine and even harm President Trump, and the media's hand has been evident throughout. So Blaze Media is the antidote. While mainstream outlets have distorted and deceived, Blaze Media is committed to delivering the truth for those who love and fight for the American way of life. And we refuse to be controlled or silenced. And at a time when the media manipulation is at its peak and independent platforms like BlazeTV are more critical than ever. So we're here to challenge the narrative and provide real, unfiltered coverage that puts you in control. And that's why right now we're offering our biggest discount yet. It's $40 off an annual subscription. And if you love this show and you love what Blaze Media stands for, visit blazetv.com/Jill. Use the promo code Jill40 at checkout to join our movement, because America deserves the truth and you deserve the truth. Blaze Media is here to deliver it. Yesterday, several individuals were reported dead and hundreds more injured after an attack in Lebanon targeted walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah. So here to discuss is Karol Markowicz, New York Post columnist and host of the Karol Markowicz Show, as well as Peter Gietl, managing editor for Return and Frontier magazine. So Karol, let's start with you, because before it was the walkie-talkies, it was the pagers. So let's start there. How exactly did the pagers explode just all across the country?
Well, I would love to know, and I don't know that we're going to find out exactly, but it looks like Israel somehow got into the supply chain, which means that it's likely that these terrorists bought those pagers from Israel, which is, of course, hilarious. But we don't know exactly how they did it. That's really a great mystery right now, how they got them all to detonate at the same time. All of that is really a large question.
So, Karol and Peter as well. Is there any previous use of this sort of tactic by Mossad? I mean, it's fascinating to the world, and I think underneath the memes is a sort of awe that they were able to pull this off. But is there any previous hints of this kind of tactic?
Well, we've seen in the past the Mossad's been able to implant bombs into small devices, including cell phones, but never anything on this level of thousands of pagers, thousands of walkie-talkies. I mean, there's some rumors coming out that it may have been a shell company through Hungary that then sold it, that was helmed by a British national that sold it to Lebanese suppliers. But, as Karol was saying, it's all very up in the air right now, and there's a lot of unknown facts.
Karol, what's your take?
Well, I would just say that a lot of my friends in Israel are amazed and just baffled at how they did it. I don't think that the average Israeli even understands how this went down. It'll be a while before we really find out what happened here. In the meantime, if you're a terrorist in Lebanon, I would not be using any electronics at all. I think carrier pigeon is the way to go for now.
Absolutely. They're not even letting people on flights now in Lebanon with the pagers or the walkie-talkies or any of these devices. They're just very scared right now. But when you look at this, Karol, just from a logistics perspective, just the sheer undertaking of pulling off something of this size, what are we looking at?
It's amazing. Look, I'm as pro-Israel as can be. I am just my jaw hanging open when I first saw the story. I thought it was just amazing and innovative. I don't think we've ever again seen anything like this before. And one of the points that I've been driving home a lot in my writing and on my feed is that Israel is in this large-scale war with Hezbollah, and Americans largely don't know about it. I think this really brought the story to Americans that this is not just a war going on in Gaza. Israel's been fighting on this second front since October 8th.
That's a really good point. And I think it has brought a lot of attention. I want to go back to that larger issue in a minute. But first, the walkie-talkies, I mean, is that the same for the audience as the pagers? And then it presents the question, what's next? I saw people online like Jack Posobiec say, my cell phone got hot and I threw it out the window. What else could be next? And are these part of the same supply chain or different? Do we know?
I don't have an answer to that. I'm not really sure. I imagine it has to be the same, right? It has to be some sort of like, buy this many pagers, get this many walkie-talkies free, or something like that from the supplier. I don't imagine it's two different supply chains.
Are you concerned at all, Karol, about this broadening the conflict in the region? And I mean, obviously, as you correctly pointed out, this has been going on since last year. But I mean, is there a danger that this could escalate into a full war with Iran, or at least Iranian proxies in Lebanon?
Right. Well, yeah, of course I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid for everybody in the Middle East that is a possibility. But again, what people need to understand is that this has already been ongoing. 80,000 people, maybe even more, are evacuated in the north of Israel. Unprecedented. Israel's never done anything like that. And, there's a lot of conversation within Israel whether that evacuation was a mistake, right? Because when do these people go home? When they do go home, isn't that when Hezbollah really ups their attacks? But they've been attacking from the north, since October 8th. They saw the opening. So this war with, you can't call it Lebanon. It's not Lebanon. Lebanon has been taken over by an Iranian-backed terrorist group, Hezbollah. So this war with Hezbollah has really been coming. And tonight there's bombings in the south part of Lebanon. I think this was all very expected. And I want also to make the point that Israel is fighting this war in Gaza. It's far easier than what is going to have to happen with Lebanon. And I think that's what Israelis have been worried about and pushing off for as long as possible. Hezbollah has much more serious weapons than Hamas. They have a much more serious operation. And again, they are Iranian-backed. They have a lot more access to funds and weapons. This is a dangerous situation for Israel. Obviously, they don't want to be in it, but I don't see what choice they've been left with.
No, it's a very tough situation. Karol, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Gentlemen, when we look at it, it's a tough situation to navigate. So how do you go through and deal with a situation like this without escalating it too much into a full-on war? There's a lot to balance here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious question is for Israel is what do they think is in their best interest in national security, that is what it is. So this is not an easy situation. I think we should note, though, that for a lot of Americans thinking about this, what it presents is the possibility that you can create technology that has a bomb in it that could go off later on. So in instance, what if you owned a company and you were a foreign and all of our stuff is manufactured overseas, and you made sure that a certain product that a certain demographic would buy all had something that could be triggered, and you could individually trigger it in some fashion, right? I mean, that's not impossible if what we just saw is possible, which would mean that you could sell products that you could essentially use as bombs anytime. I mean, I think that is unlocking the imagination to a lot of dark possibilities for a lot of people right now.
Well, it's an excellent point, Matt, too, because these supply chains, which are very crucial to every electronic component that we use, are almost entirely foreign-based, especially in China, which is obviously a geopolitical rival. And it begs really important questions about, we've outsourced all this to save money, and there's a lot of second magnitude issues that come up with this, of exposing yourself if they can just plant a bomb in any tech product.
What we're learning today is we think we know so much, and yet we know so little. That seems to be the theme of the day. And when we come back, could we be on the brink of another collapse? Our next guest will explain why yesterday's rate cuts are and why they could be disastrous for the economy. The Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 50 basis points yesterday, and it's only the third time in history that the Fed had kicked off rate cuts at that level. The other two times, the economy crashed back in 2001 and 2007. Ed Dowd is the founder of Phinance Technologies and author of Cause Unknown, the Epidemic of Sudden Deaths in 2021, 2022, and 2023. He joins us now. So, Ed, Jerome Powell said the economy is strong and the S&P is at all-time highs. So why did they cut at pandemic levels?
They're cutting interest rates because not all is well in the behind the curtain. There are problems overseas in the Bank of Japan, which their issues came to light in August. The yen carry trade started to wobble. There are liquidity issues across the globe, and clearly they see something in the economy they don't like. So they're jawboning people to continue to think everything's hunky-dory, but a 50 basis point rate hike, which most economists were expecting rate cut. Most economists were expecting a 25 basis point rate cut, and they were all wrong. The T-bill market was the signal that we saw this week that suggested that the Fed is behind the curve. So the countdown for when the recession really starts to happen is on. We were predicting a recession at the end of 23. We were wrong because of the government spending and immigration, but that juice is worn off. Our own economic indicators indicate we've been slowing down since March. So this is typical in rate hike cycles and plateaus. Once they start cutting, most of the financial damage and economic damage begins because most people don't understand monetary policy has a lag of about 18 months. So this first rate cut won't filter into the economy until 12 to 18 months from now. So they'll be chasing rate cuts all the way down. And I suspect, given what's going on with the sovereign debt bubble, there'll be all sorts of quantitative easing and money printing at the nexus of the next crisis.
Ed, you've previously said that when you see the Fed start cutting, run. So what? Now that we see the Fed start cutting, what do you have to say in terms of advice for people out there?
Well, I've been telling people to do what Warren Buffett's been doing, so I have good company. Warren Buffett has literally raised the biggest boatload of cash he has in his history. He owns 4% of the T-bill market. Those are 3-month T-bills. When he bought them, they were yielding 5.5%. Now T-bills are yielding 4.74%. So, when we have this kind of looming recession, and a recession, given the amount of debt levels we have globally, will cause some sort of financial turmoil. The last two drawdowns in the stock market when we had a recession were 50%. The 2000 dot-com bubble, we had the financial crisis, that was a 50% drawdown. COVID, we had a drawdown, but then they met that drawdown with warlike spending that stemmed the tide and caused inflation. So we're going to have a drawdown. What we don't know is what the policymakers are going to respond with, whether it's bazookas out the wazoo or even if they can contain it. But I'd be running for the hills. The stock market may linger up here and go to new highs for a couple more months, or could collapse tomorrow. Who knows? But typically speaking, the clock has started. We see commodities not reaching the highs they made in 22. Interest rates are now going lower, and typically when you get all three of those asset classes, it's just a matter of time until stocks give up the ghost. And that's how people typically measure economic health. It's wrong. The economy is not good. It hasn't been good for a while. The employment numbers have been fraudulent, as we all know. And now the Fed kind of figured out that the payroll numbers were fraudulent, probably a little earlier than the Biden administration admitted, but they're behind the curve. And we're going to see rate cut after rate cut once this gets going.
And it's election season right now. We're all counting down to November 5th. How does that factor into any of this?
So, look, if the stock market can linger on into the election, that favors Kamala. If it does give up the ghost before the election, it favors Trump. So my suspicion is the policymakers are going to do everything to keep this thing from collapsing before the election. But we do have global situations. We have Iran and Israel ready to go to war at any moment. We have the Biden administration talking about launching cruise missiles into the heart of Russia, assisting Ukraine. Putin has drawn the line there. And then we have China and Taiwan. So there's a whole host of black swan events that could occur, not to mention any kind of misstep in the financial markets where they lose control. So, the policymakers want to keep this going through the election, but it's very precarious and anything can go off at any moment. But anything that causes a major stock market correction into November favors Trump wholeheartedly.
Ed, I could talk about this with you all day. The global sovereign debt bubble. I am a nerd, and it is one of my favorite topics, ironically enough. But thanks so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and enjoy being on your show. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and I talk about this all the time, Peterson. This is the thing that if people are like, hey, Jill, she's super cool, she likes fun things. No, I will bring a party down every single time.
I'm going to vouch for you. You are a finance nerd, and everyone out there should know this. Yes.
Yeah, it started in 2008.
Bitcoin, crypto, anything.
All of it. Yeah. It's all the same bubble. It's all the same thing because the global sovereign debt bubble is the big thing. But for me, this all started in 2008. I read The Creature from Jekyll Island. That was my entrance into this entire world, and to just be flipping the pages of that book while it was playing out in front of us in the markets and in the response to everything. Chapter 2 is the name of the game is bailout. And that will stick with me forever from The Creature from Jekyll Island. And you just see how everything works.
Yeah, I mean, I think that year changed America forever in many ways. And people don't talk about the political fallout enough of what was going on. And I think to what Ed was saying, just speaking politically, not being an economic analyst, I mean, volatility is going to increase. There's no way, volatility is just going to increase politically and culturally. There's no way around that, right? There's no way around that, barring some kind of miracle from God, that it would literally be seen as such. So when you look at these two things together, we've been kicking the can down the curb. I mean, it is just be prepared out there, and when you know that volatility will increase, you can prepare and not be the one going crazy as the world changes around you.
Well, that's you led me to another book of The Fourth Turning, and we could just go through this. Could just be Jill's book hour at this point in time, because you can kick the can down the road, but you can't anymore because we're in the crisis season.
Altogether, that should be a happy hour.
It should be. It should be. But I look at this, and Chris Bedford and Daniel Horowitz, the others that we had on the show today. There are at least some people on the right that are trying to fight. And it's not just the GOP establishment anymore.
Yeah, and you should say, look, the bottom has fallen out in Washington. So if you want to talk about, just look at that as the economic analysis, right? It's done. The stock market has plummeted. Leaders in Washington don't represent you anymore, and everyone knows that. And meanwhile, in the states, you see red states rising, red states reddening, and that's real. That transfer of power is real.
Yeah, the GOP, it's over. Hopefully the economy can last a little bit longer. Make sure you subscribe to Blaze News Tonight on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to rate and review the show. We'll be back with more tomorrow.